Welcome on Easy Learning. Now in this part of the video, I am going to read or start a new chapter, Animals in Prison, written by Jawaharlal Nehru. In this part of the video, I will only read the chapter and the other parts of the video I will explain them respectively. Animals in Prison by Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru, born in 1889 and died in 1964, India's first Prime Minister, was popular among the children as Chacha Nehru. He was a man of rare sensitivity. Educated at Harrow and Cambridge University, he became a barrister after studying natural science and law and returned to India in 1921. Deeply influenced by Mahatma Gandhi, he joined Indian politics and soon emerged as a leader of the country's youth. However, he was not a mere politician. He was also a dreamer, idealist, humanist, and artist in words as well. His works and autobiography, The Discovery of India, Glimpses of World History, and Letters from a Father to His Daughter, are remarkable for a rare vigor and beauty. They establish him as a master of English prose. While in prison before independence, he read books, observed nature, dreamt at times, and wrote in his powerful and poetic style about all that he thought and felt. His elegant poetical prose is best captured in his autobiography. The following extract, taken from an autobiography, reveals Nehru's love for nature. It is remarkable how he derives pleasure from watching different animals and gives respect even to the tiniest animals. The piece is a wonderful example of live and let live. Animals in Prison. For 14.5 months, I lived in my little cell or room in the Dehradun jail and began to feel as if I was almost a part of it. I was familiar with every bit of it. I knew every mark and dent on the whitewashed walls and on the uneven floor and the ceiling with its moth-eaten rafters. In the little yard outside, I greeted little tufts of grass and odd bits of stone as old friends. I was not alone in my cell, for several colonies of wasps and hornets lived there, and many lizards found a home behind the rafters, emerging in the evenings in search of prey. If thoughts and emotions leave their traces behind in the physical surroundings, the very air of that cell must be thick with them, and they must cling to every object in that little space. I had had better cells in other prisons, but in Dehradun, I had one privilege which was very precious to me. The jail proper was a very small one, and we were kept in an old lockup outside the jail walls. But within the jail compound, this place was so small that there was no room to walk about in it, and so we were allowed morning and evening to go out and walk up and down in front of the gate, a distance of about 100 yards. We remained in the jail compound, but this coming outside the walls gave us a view of the mountains and the fields and a public road at some distance. This was not a special privilege for me. It was common for all the A and B class prisoners kept at Dehradun. Within the compound, but outside the jail walls, there was another small building called the European lockup. This had no enclosing wall, and a person inside the cell would have a fine view of the mountains and the life outside. European convicts and other kept here were also allowed to walk in front of the jail gate every morning and evening. Only a prisoner who has been confined for long behind high walls can appreciate the extraordinary psychological value of these outside walks and open views. I loved these outings, and I did not give them up even during the monsoon, when the rain came down for days in torrents and I had to walk in ankle deep of water. I would have welcomed the outing in any place, but the sight of the towering Himalayas nearby was an added joy which went a long way to removing the weariness of prison. It was my good fortune that during the long period when I had no interviews and when for many months I was quite alone, I could gaze at these mountains that I loved. I could not see the mountains from my cell, but my mind was full of them, and I was ever conscious of their nearness, and a secret intimacy seemed to grow between us. Flocks of birds have flown high and away, a solitary drift of cloud too has gone wandering on, and I sit alone with Ching Ting Peak towering beyond. We never grow tired of each other, the mountain and I. I am afraid I cannot say with the poet Li Tai Po that I never grew weary even of the mountain, but that was a rare experience, and as a rule I found great comfort in its proximity. Its solidity and calm looked down upon me with the wisdom of a million years, and mocked at my varying moods, and soothed my fevered mind. A spring was very pleasant in Dehradun, and it was a far longer one than in the plains below. The winter had denuded almost all the trees of their leaves, and they stood naked and bare. Even four magnificent peepal trees, which stood in front of the jail gate, much to my surprise, dropped nearly all their leaves. Gaunt and cheerless, they stood there till the spring air warmed them up again and sent a message of life to their innermost cells. Suddenly there was a stir both in the peepals and the other trees, and an air of mystery surrounded them as of secret operations going on behind the scenes, and I would be startled to find little bits of green peeping out all over them. It was a gay and cheering sight, and then very rapidly the leaves would come out in their millions and glisten in the sunlight and play about in the breeze. How wonderful is the sudden change from bud to leaf! I had never noticed before that fresh mango leaves are reddish brown, russet colored, remarkably like the autumn tints on the Kashmir hills, but they change color soon and become green. The monsoon rains were always welcome, for they ended the summer heat, but one could have too much of a good thing, and Dehradun is one of the favored haunts of the rain god. Within the first 5 or 6 weeks of the break of the monsoon, we would have about 50 or 60 inches of rain, and it was not pleasant to sit cooped up in a little narrow place, trying to avoid the water dripping from the ceiling or rushing in from the windows. Autumn again was pleasant, and so was the winter, except when it rained. With thunder and rain and piercing cold winds, one longed for a decent habitation and a little warmth and comfort. Occasionally there would be a hailstorm, with hailstones bigger than marbles coming down on the corrugated iron roofs and making a tremendous noise, something like an artillery bombardment. I remember one day particularly, it was the 24th of December 1932, there was a thunderstorm and rain all day, and it was bitterly cold. Altogether, it was one of the most miserable days, from the bodily point of view, that I have spent in jail. In the evening, it cleared up suddenly, and all my misery departed when I saw all the neighboring mountains and hills covered with a thick mantle of snow. The next day, Christmas Day, was lovely and clear, and there was a beautiful view of snow-covered mountains. Prevented from indulging in normal activities, we became more observant of nature's ways. We watched also the various animals and insects that came our way. As I grew more observant, I noticed all manner of insects living in my cell or in the little yard outside. I realized that while I complained of loneliness, that yard, which seemed empty and deserted, was teeming with life. All these creeping or crawling or flying insects lived their life without interfering with me in any way, and I saw no reason why I should interfere with them. But there was continuous war between me and bedbugs, mosquitoes, and to some extent flies. Wasps and hornets I tolerated, and there were hundreds of them in my cell. There had been a little tiff between us when, inadvertently, I think a wasp had stung me. In my anger, I tried to exterminate the lot, but they put up a brave fight in defense of their temporary home, which probably contained their eggs. And I digested and decided to leave them in peace if they did not interfere with me anymore. For over a year after that, I lived in the cell, surrounded by these wasps and hornets, and they never attacked me, and we respected each other. Bats I did not like, but I had to endure them. They flew soundlessly in the evening dusk, and one could just see them against the darkening sky. Airy things, I had a horror of them. They seemed to pass within an inch of one's face, and I was always afraid that they might hit me. Higher up in the air passed the big bats, the flying foxes. I used to watch the ants and the white ants and other insects by the hour, and the lizards as they crept about in the evenings and stalked their prey and chased each other, wagging their tails in a most comic fashion. Ordinarily, they avoided wasps, but twice I saw them stalk them with enormous care and seize them from the front. I do not know if this avoidance of the sting was intentional or accidental. Then there were squirrels, crowds of them if trees were about. They would become very venturesome and come right near us. In Lucknow jail, I used to sit reading almost without moving for considerable periods, and a squirrel would climb up my leg and sit on my knee and have a look round. And then it would look into my eyes and realize that I was not a tree or whatever it had taken me for. Fear would disable it for a moment, and then it would scamper away. Little baby squirrels would sometimes fall down from the trees. The mother would come after them, roll them up into a little ball, and carry them off to safety. Occasionally, the baby got lost. One of my companions picked up 3 of these lost baby squirrels and looked after them. They were so tiny that it was a problem feeding them. The problem was, however, solved rather ingeniously. A fountain pen filler with a little cotton wool attached to it made an efficient feeding bottle. Pigeons abounded in all the jails I went to, except in the mountain prison of Almora. There were thousands of them. Sometimes the jail officials would shoot them down and feed on them. There were manias, of course. They are too. We found everywhere. A pair of them nested over my cell door in Dehradun, and I used to feed them. They grew quite tame, and if there was any delay in their morning or evening meal, they would sit quite near me and loudly demand their food. It was amusing to watch their signs and listen to their impatient cries. In Niani, there were thousands of parrots, and large numbers of them lived in the crevices of my barrack walls. Their courtship and love-making was always a fascinating sight, and sometimes there were fierce quarrels between 2 male parrots over a lady parrot, who sat calmly by waiting for the result of the encounter and ready to grant her favors to the winner. Dehradun had a variety of birds, and there was regular jumble of singing and lively chattering and twittering, and high above it all came the quail's plaintive call during the monsoon, and just before it, the brain fever bird visited us, and I realized soon why it was so named. It was amazing the persistence with which it went on repeating the same notes, in daytime and at night, in sunshine and in pouring rain. We could not see most of these birds, so we could only hear them as a rule, as there were no trees in our little yard, but I used to watch the eagles and the kites, gliding gracefully high up in the air sometimes, swooping down and then allowing themselves to be carried up by a current of air. Often a horde of wild ducks would fly over our heads. There was a large colony of monkeys in Bareilly jail, and their antics were always worth watching. One incident impressed me. A baby monkey managed to come down into our barrack enclosure, and he could not mount up the wall again. The warder and some convict overseers and other prisoners caught hold of him and tied a bit of string round his neck. The parents, presumably, of the little one saw all this from the top of the high wall, and their anger grew. Suddenly, one of them, a huge monkey, jumped down and charged almost right into the crowd which surrounded the baby monkey. It was an extraordinary, brave thing to do, for the warders had sticks and lathis, and they were waving them about, and there was quite a crowd of them. Reckless courage triumphed, and the crowd of humans fled terrified, leaving their sticks behind them. The little monkey was rescued. We often had animal visitors that were not welcome. Scorpions were frequently found in our cells, especially after a thunderstorm. It was surprising that I was never stung by one, for I would come across them in the most unlikely places, on my bed or sitting on a book which I had just lined up. I kept a particularly black and poisonous-looking brood in a bottle for some time, feeding him with flies, etc., and then when I tied him up on a wall with a string, he managed to escape. I had no desire to meet him loose again, and so I cleaned my cell out and hunted for him everywhere, but he had vanished. 3 or 4 snakes were also found in my cells or near them. News of one of them got out, and there were headlines in the press. As a matter of fact, I welcomed the diversion. Prison life is dull enough, and everything that breaks through the monotony is appreciated. Not that I appreciate or welcome snakes, but they do not fill me with terror as they do some people. I am afraid of their bite, of course, and would protect myself if I saw a snake. But there would be no feeling of repulsion or overwhelming fright. Centipedes horrify me much more. It is not so much fear as instinctive repulsion. In Alipur jail in Calcutta, I woke in the middle of the night and felt something crawling over my foot. I pressed a torch I had, and I saw a centipede on the bed. Instinctively and with amazing rapidity, I vaulted clear out of that bed and nearly hit the cell wall. I realized fully then what Pavlov's reflexes were. In Dehradun, I saw a new animal, or rather an animal which was new to me. I was standing at the jail gate talking to the jailer when we noticed a man outside carrying a strange animal. The jailer sent for him, and I saw something between a lizard and a crocodile, about 2 feet long, with claws and a scaly covering. This animal, which was very much alive, had been twisted round in a most peculiar way, forming a kind of knot, and its owner had passed a pole through this knot and was merrily carrying it in this fashion. He called it a bow. When asked by the jailer what he proposed to do with it, he replied with a broad smile that he would make bhuji, a kind of curry, out of it. He was a forest dweller. Subsequently, I discovered from reading F. W. Champion's book, The Jungle in the Sunlight and Shadow, that this animal was the pangolin. Prisoners, especially long-term convicts, have to suffer most from emotional starvation. Often they seek some emotional satisfaction by keeping animal pets. The ordinary prisoner cannot keep them, but the convict overseers have a little more freedom, and the jail staff usually does not object. The commonest pets were squirrels and, strangely, mongooses. Dogs are not allowed in jails, but cats seem to be encouraged. A little kitten made friends with me once. It belonged to a jail official, and when he was transferred, he took it away with him. I missed it. Although dogs are not allowed, I got tied up with some dogs accidentally in Dehradun. A jail official had brought a bitch, and then he was transferred, and he deserted her. The poor thing became a homeless wanderer, living under culverts, picking up scraps from the warders, usually starving. As I was kept in the lockup outside the jail proper, she used to come to me begging for food. I began to feed her regularly, and she gave birth to a litter of pups under a culvert. Many of these were taken away, but 3 remained, and I fed them. One of the puppies fell ill with a violent distemper and gave me a great deal of trouble. I nursed her with care, and sometimes I would get up a dozen times in the course of the night to look after her. She survived, and I was happy that my nursing had pulled her round. I came in contact with animals far more in prison than I had done outside. I had always been fond of dogs and had kept some, but I could never look after them properly as other matters claimed my attention. In prison, I was grateful for their company. Indians do not, as a rule, approve of animals as household pets. It is remarkable that in spite of their general philosophy of non-violence to animals, they are often singularly careless and unkind to them. Even the cow, that favored animal thou looked up to and almost worshipped by many Hindus and often the cause of riots, is not treated kindly. Worship and kindness do not always go together. Different countries have adopted different animals as symbols of their ambition or character. The eagle of the United States of America, and of Germany the lion and bulldog of England, the fighting cock of France, the bear of old Russia. How far do these patron animals mold national character? Most of them are aggressive, fighting animals, beasts of prey. It is not surprising that the people who grow up with these examples before them should mold themselves consciously after them and strike up aggressive attitudes and roar and prey on others. Nor is it surprising that the Hindu should be mild and non-violent, for his patron animal is the cow.